going to cover many subjects. First, we're going to subject of ne'emanut amei haaretz. You have people who are not educated, and you have an issue of trust. How you treated those people, especially when it's come to consecrated items. We're going to discuss also the subject of people who convert to Judaism and then it's a change of the mind. What do? Another subject left up in the air, unsolved. It's called Ad Sheyavo Eliyahu. We're waiting for the end of the days to solve certain things. We have also a subject of Yerusha, inheritance between different children. Some of them were Torah people who are very educated. Some of them go different direction, and how you treated inheritance that involved with the consecrated items. In general, the subject of Tum'at Eretz Ha'amim, which is any subject outside of Eretz Yisrael that treated in a level of impurity, especially when it's come to attachment to corpse, unmarked cemetery, and more. It's also overall another subject that we're going to discuss. So where we are, we're on page 25, 3 lines from the top of the page. Israel at that time, it was certain areas, as much as Eretz Israel. If you hear Netanyahu speaking in the United Nations, he said it's a small strip of property, yet when it's come to Israel at the ancient time, it was location that's called Galileite, the north part. It was another part that's called Yehuda, the Judaic area. People who are not educated, who live in Judea area, we trust them as far as the wine or a oil that was sanctified. Soon you see why and how. People who live in the Galileite, we do not. So the Gemara said, Bihuda in ubagalilo maita'ama. Why the Mishnah tells us that amei haaretz, that trusted, they live in Judea, yes, but you can trust them. But if they live in Galilee, no. Why you differentiate between the two places? Amar yesh lakish mipnei sheretzuah shel kutim mafseket benehem. The kutim, or the Samaritans, was a group of people that we have an issue of their Jewishness. What is the issue of their Jewishness? We discuss several times. Let's refresh our memory. Yeah. First and foremost, at that time, the non-Jewish world were not particular in regards to mark graves. Meaning, we have regulations that we have to mark the monument, we have to put names, we have to write about the date of passing, etc. Those cemeteries, non-Jewish cemeteries, that does not carry a mark on those graves, we have a big quandary if there is a graves there or not. So, for example, when someone in those ancient times, they don't use a machine, they use a ox, a donkey, whatever it is. They use those animals that go and plowing the field, right? Plowing the corpse, plowing the field. So while they're doing so, imagine a person does that, all of a sudden, boom, you find a grave without a mark. So now you're concerned in several things, because number one, while you're plowing, you can plow also an area that they have a corpse there. What happened while they're plowing, it can turn that the bone can be scattered all over, and therefore, as we explained many times, someone who get in contact with the body, with the corpse, it's an issue of ritual impurity. So biblically speaking, it's not an issue, because we have which we call chezkat ta'or. We assume that it's okay. Sages come and put a boundary and said, since there is a chance to have a corpse, meaning part of the corpse, while in the past they plowed that property, there it's an issue of ritual impurity. The other thing is, it was gzerat ohel, meaning, and here we go to the next step. The Kutais, the Samaritans, they are pagans. They worship idols. They came from different locations, etc., etc. Basically, it was the Assyrian king, whose name is Shalmansar, and he brought them from Assyrian, and he let them inhabitants different part of the land that was desolated. Again, that was after the era of the 10 tribes who expelled from the land. So those Samaritans or Kutais, they convert to Judaism not because they want to be part of the Jewish faith, but because they're afraid of the lions that kill some of them. But according to a Book of Kings, chapter 17, second Book of Kings, chapter 17, they return to their idol worshipping. They return to be pagan. So when the sages discover that, they exclude them from being part of the Jewish nation. And the Gemarrah in Chulin, page 6, said that since we treated them as all the other non-Jewish people worldwide, therefore the same decree that applies to Tum'at Eretz Ha'amim, to impurity of non-Jewish places worldwide, applies to them even they still live in Israel. So here Reish Lakish come in, and he said, since is a strip of land inhabited by the Samaritan, separate between Judea and Galilee, and it is impossible to travel from one land to another without passing by that strip. So here we have the decree of the sages that the land inhabited by non-Jewish nations are considered ritually impure, as we explained earlier, so that it will be impossible to transport food from Galilee to Judea, where the temple is located, without the food becoming impure. So even oil and wine prepared by people who are Chaveri, meaning people who are Torah scholar or Torah people who live in Galilee, were not accepted for sacrificial food because they passed by that property. So the Gemara challenged that, and they said, "V'neitiv beshida, teiva umigdal." So you know what you do? You just transport it for that location. You place it inside a box or chest or closet, which means that it's called teiva sgura. You put it inside, so then it's like ohel hachotzetz bifnei hatumah. It's like a something that make a separation between their ritual impurity and them, and therefore you can transport wine and oil from Galilee to Judah, and you can pass by that property and you do not have an issue. So why we said again in the Mishnah that we accept only from Judea? So Hamani Rabbi the Amar Ohel Zaruk Lav Shmei Ohel. So that's follow Rabbi Dr. who said that a moving tent is not called a proper tent. So therefore it's a subject of ritual impurity. So we explained that as far as the oil mitaltel, you're moving the tent, That's the Rashi in Tractate Gittin, page 8b. He explains that it means that it's a moving tent. Nowadays you see it a lot. So if it's totally in the air, so it's not an issue. It's not chotzetz, it's not interposed from ritual impurity. But if it carries, then it's different. It's the Tanya. הנכנס לארץ העמים בשידת תיבה ומגדל רבי מטמא ורבי יוסף בן יהודה מתאר. So imagine someone is traveling from Israel overseas, okay, and he doesn't want to get in contact with ritual impurity, so he travel inside a box, okay, so he will not attach anything because he's totally detached. So according to Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, it's still impure. According to Rabbi Yosef bar Yehuda, is pure. So it means that you do not have any solution how to transport the wine and the oil from Galilee to Jerusalem while you have in between that strip. So ולעיתוע בכלי חרס המוקף צמיד פתיל. So they said it's another issue. Let them bring oil and wine to the Beit HaMikdash, to the temple, in the special vessel. It's the earthenware vessel sealed with tightly bound cover, which cannot contact impurity even if it is in the same tent as the corpse. Because the Torah said in the book of Numbers, chapter 19, and every open vessel which has no covering tightly bound upon it, it is unclean. So basically earthenware we treated different, kli cheres. It's not observing that so since it's not accepting any ritual impurity, so you don't have an issue, you can transport to that land. אמר רבי אליעזר, or according to השש רבי אלעזר, שונין אין הקודש ניצול בצמיד פתיל. So he said that the sacrificial food, unlike other items, it's not spread from impurity by being in the container with tightly bound cover. So the idea is that's a rabbinic decree. Some say that it's a biblical, that you can't use the tzamid patil. והתניא אין חטאת ניצלת בצמיד פתיל. מה אליו הקודש ניצול? So we learned in a Braita that the rabbis were strict when it's come to the water of chatat more than the kodesh, because they said that when it's come to a tightly bound cover, you are more it's not the idea of ritual impurity applies to that. We explained several times that water that combined with a red heifer, the ashes that come out of a red heifer, that we purified, biblically speaking, we purified someone who contact the corpse, so it's not spread from impurity by being vessel with tightly bound cover. So the Gemarrah said, "Lo, you should learn that if you take a water that is come from a spring water or creek water, and said המים שאינם מקודשים ניצולים, you have to differentiate between a water, sacrificial food that is spread from impurity, that consecrated by being mixed with ashes of the red heifer, and is spread from impurity by being in a vessel with a tightly bound cover. So even if they are designated for such a use at a later stage, so המים שאינם מקודשים ניצולים בצמיד פתיל. So here again, we would not reconcile it. So the Gemara said, "V'ha'amar ula chavraya medakan begalila." So here it's something that involves also with faith. The whole idea that at that time, the Chaverim, meaning the religious people, the Torah people, they purify the wine, the oil, they produce the wine and the oil by standards of purity used for sacrificial food in Galilee to be used for sacrificial purpose. Even it wasn't temple, and it was just in a hope that when a temple will be built, they can use it. So if they don't intend to pass to that strip, why they do that? The Gemara said in Yomi 66 that you don't do that nowadays if you don't have temple. So they said manichin uchlesheyavo Eliyahu v'yitarena. The truth is they leave them in their place, and they thought was that when the time of Messianic era, when Elijah will come and purify the road from Galilee to Judah, so this item will become eligible for use. So here you see a little bit idea of people who live with a great emunah, with a great faith, that soon, today, Elijah will come, and therefore they prepare the wine. And Rabbeinu Hananel said, "Ve'im yavo Eliyahu v'yodia," and if Elijah will come and say, announce, "Shelo nitmeu," that it's not an issue of ritual impurity, אף על פי שהדרך מפסקת אותה שעה מטהרה. So there's a potential, according to Rabbeinu Hananel, that they purified. Rashi said differently. Rashi said, ויראה להם שביל בה שאינו מארץ עמים. Eliyahu going to show them a special path that it's not part of the tribe of the other nation. So you see here that according to that view, at that point is ritually impure. When Elijah will come, so he will tell us. So Elijah is not bring a halacha chadasha, is not posek a new rules. The truth is that Tosfot tell us is that here when it's come to Efer Para, when it's come to red heifer, so you have enough in a small amount. But wine, he asked a question, how people are able to go as a pilgrim to a temple, if that's the case. אבל צריך עיון תוספות, I'm just reading you the vignette of תוספות. העולים לרגל מן הגליל. How come they go from Galilee to the temple at that time? כיוון דאפסקי לרצועה, because they have that strip, נטמע ובאי הזעה שלישי ושביעי, כי דאמר בפרק כהן גדול בנזיר. He said in Tractate Nazir, page 54, that you need to have the sprinkling of the third and the seventh. So the truth is that you have a big issue among the Mefarshim, how really people went as a pilgrim to the temple. So Rav Vosner is a great posek in Bnei Brak, and he was asked by Rabbi Lieberman from Yerushalayim. He asked him this question: how really the Kohanim travel, not just at that time, but throughout generations since that time, from Judea to Galilee. So Rav Vosner have a big writing over that, and he said the big question is, what's the issue of ritual impurity? Is that because of the Kutim, because of the Samaritan? In short, he said, since today we don't have these ancient Samaritans, according to him, so therefore it's not an issue. Only if you go by Rashi, that you say that is general issue of Tumat Eretz Amim. In general, Rabbi Vosner conclude, and he said that it's muvla betoch kedushat Eretz Yisrael, because it's part of the land, so it's kind of swallow. And since most of the people nowadays who inhabit in there are the Jews, so therefore it's okay. There are those who said that they're allowed to do it because of mitzvah Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, because the mitzvah to inhabit in the land. Mishnah said, "Ubishat hagitot ne'emanin afala truma." So the Mishnah said that when it's come to doing the period of the wine press and olive press, here it's different. Amei haaretz, people who are not educated, are trusted even with regard to purity of truma. So, because they said when they did this wine and oil, afhem metaharim et kleihem, they also purified their vessels. Veraminhi, we bring now another Mishnah in Tractate Taharot, chapter 9, that goes the other way around. The Mishnah said there, Hagomer Zeit. So they said, Hagomer Zeitar. They said, one which is an Amaretz, who finishing pressing his olives. They said, Yeshayer kupa achat v'itnena le'ani kohen. He should leave over one sack of unpressed olives and give it to the poor kohen as truma. So he designated that. That's the Amaretz. So according to Rashi, you see that since the olives not receive ritual impurity until you completed of bringing all the olives to the wine press, to the Beit Abad, the place that you produce it, so therefore he said he leave that kupa shel zeitim, that olives, to a kohen. So in a sense the kohen knew that it's okay, and then he can go with that. So what do you derive from that? Rashi said you derive from that you don't trust them, because that's the way for them to do it. You give it to the kohen, and the kohen, even at that period, which is the period of the wine press and olive press, still you don't trust an Amaretz in regards to the purity of truma. And that's basically contradicted the Mishnah, because the Mishnah said that during the period of the wine press and olive press, an Amaretz are trusted even with regard to purity of truma. Now the truth is that you have here different avenues between Rashi, Tosfot, Natziv, and others. Rashi hold that it's le'ani kohen, to a poor kohen, right? Tosfot say that it's shibush, that it's a mistake, and it's not ani but einei, it's another yud needs to be here, which means you don't have, he says, what's the difference if it's a rich or poor? They say that they just need to have, because it's the issue of trust, you need to have it at the front of the eyes of the kohen. That's the Tosfot view. Tosfot Yom Tov said that the pasuk said lemoshcha, which means you have to have kamut meruba shetechashev. You have a large quantity that it's considering good, and that applies to a rich kohen, because if you give it to a poor, that's also the rosh. Because if you give it to a rich and it's a small amount, he will not be bothered. He doesn't want to touch of those pieces that needs to have a press process of olives. And the Rambam said that he likes to get, especially if he's wealthy, only olive oils. But Rabbeinu Ovadia said that you can give it if you wish also to a rich kohen. The Natziv said that the truth is it was a time that the kohen himself was doing that job of pressing olives, and he was poor, so they allowed to give it to him. The Rav Eliashiv asked here a question. Rav Eliashiv asked, you have the Gemara in page we studied, page 22b, that said, if it's come to lehatbil kli betoch kli, if it's come to duck in the mikveh, vessel, inner vessel within the outer vessel, so you said you can trust them if he said hitbalti, if he said I did it, the amaret, versus if it's come to his declaration hitbalti she'ein befiv keshforferet hanod, that doesn't have that size of the tube, so you do not trust the amaret. So you see here, Rabbi Yashiv asked that you see here that you can trust amaretz even without the Kohen supervisor, without the Kohen seeing it. Anyway, he left it as a question, Rabbi Yashiv. So the Gemara responded and said, Amar Rav Nachman lo kashya, ha becharfei, ha be'aflei. The Gemara said it's not, Rav Nachman said it's not the issue, it's not difficult. In a Mishnah where Amei Haaretz are trusted to produce pure olive oil themselves, so referring to people who press their olives earlier, during the regular season of the olive press. But here, the case that referring to those who press the olive later, after the period when most people press the olive had pressed, that means she'echaru le'avshil, so that's already past the time, you do not trust them. So Amar le Rav Ada bar Ahava kegon ma, give me an example that this aflei. So he said, ke'otan shel beit avicha, those olives of your father's house. So Rav Nachman's father have many olives, and he often pressed them after the regular pressing season. So this is an example of him. That's basically Rabbeinu Hananel. Rashi said it's not necessary that he did it, it's just that they are late with their process of ripening. Now, the Gemara here offer another explanation to that contradiction between the Mishnayot. Rav Yosef Amar begalila shanu. The Mishnah in Taharot, it's was taught in regard to the Amei Haaretz in Galilee, that they not trust with the purification of the truma even at the time of the press. And our Mishnah speaks about Amei Haaretz in Judea, that they are trusted in that regard. So it means that only in Judea they are trusted, but in Galilee they're not trusted even at the season of the press. In general, it reminds me, I have a nephew in Israel that he is the head mashgiach of the slaughterhouse and others, and he, so many stories of people who were just, the moment you don't watch them, especially when it's involved with heavy money, they turn around and backstab you, meaning they do things in a second, whenever you don't. Imagine you have a cow worth a lot of money, right? And while the process of checking, after the animal slaughter, or even before, and you discover in the intestine a hole or something like that, that make it improper, treifa. But in so many cases, he said, they try to circumvent the mashgichim, in many, many cases. So here is the issue you see in juxtaposition when it's come to people who are not really Torah people, how far you can trust, how far you can take their words, or you can trust them, because they can do a lot of things. I can't tell you how many times they offer me to be involved with supervision, and excluding our own synagogue, I never want to take that position. meaning to be the Rabbi Mashgiach or responsible for Ashgachot, because the reality is, no matter who is the organization, who is the rabbi or responsible, if people in the kitchen or people involved there want to do things, they just need you to turn around, to go elsewhere, and they can do things. Anyway, so here, הייתי ואביי, עבר הירדן וגליל, הרי הן כיהודה, נאמנים. Okay, so this, the Jordan part, we treated as Judea, and you trust them על היין בשעת יין ועל השמן בשעת השמן, אבל לא על היין בשעת שמן ולא על שמן בשעת יין. So it means that's not according to Rav Yosef. So the Gemara concluded, אלא מחוורדה כדשנין מעיקרא. The answer, as we said initially, that is speaking of the period following the conclusion of the wine press. So therefore you cannot trust לעמי הארץ. עברו הגיטות והעבדים והביאו לו חבית של יין. So if that period of the press passed and they brought him a barrel of wine, so לא יקבלנה ממנו, he should not accept that. אבל מניחה לגת הבאה, he leave it to the next season and then he give it to the Kohen. באו מיני מרב ששת. עבר וקיבלה מהו שיניחנה לגת הבאה. If he violated, he did it for all kind of reasons, and he accepted, can he take it for the next one? Because the Mishnah tells us that the Kohen should not do it, should not accept it. אמר להם תניתוח. We learned in the Mishnah in Tractate Chagigah, chapter 6. 25b. חבר ועם הארץ שירשו אותה ועם עם הארץ יכול לומר לו אותו אתה חיתין שמקום פלוני ואני חיתין שמקום פלוני. Here is a situation, you have two sons, one is a חבר, one is עם הארץ, one is a Torah world, one is a not, and the inheritance from the father, the property. And here's the issue that you have a wheat. So the wheat, some of them are dry, some of them are not, and there is an issue of ritual impurity. So the chaver can say to his brother, you take the wheat in such and such place, and I will take the wheat in such and such place. So chaver knows that the former batch of the wheat had been made susceptible to impurity, and he will therefore have no use for it. So while the later batch had not been made susceptible to impurity. So here you have the issue of yesh brera or en brera. If you take the retroactive perception on that, I wish to have more time on this, because the whole idea of, you see it a lot in the writing of Rabbi Akiva, you have here several points. You have the issue of lifnei iver. You don't put a stumble block before a blind person, but you have also issue of sveik sveika when it's come to a retroactive brera or not brera. But anyway, so he said, Tolat hayayin shmakom vani yayin shmakom ploni. So he said, you take the wine that is such as place, and I will take in such as place, because the chaver knows that the later batch of wine has not been rendered impure. So he wants to take the batch that his share. So you have here the brothers that will inherit a quantity of a certain item, and they will each end up receiving the equal share of that item. So the principle of retroactive designation applies, the yesh brera, meaning that it's considered that whatever portion any particular brother receives, in the end, is the one that he had been designated for him as his inheritance from the beginning. It is not considered as a trade or a business transaction with the other brothers exchange for their portions. So, אבל לא יאמר לו תורתה לך ואני יבש, תורתה חיטין ואני סורי. So this is a issue of לפני עיוור, because he should say to his brother, okay, you take the wet, I take the dry. You take the wheat, I take the barley. So again, you know the truth. You are in the Torah world, so how you can do it? So ותנא עלה, we learn in תוספתא דמאי, chapter 6, אותו חבר שורף הלך. Okay, so this is the חבר must burn the wet produce. Why? Because he can use it for food, and only hadlaka, only to lit it. הוא מניח את היבש. המה יניחן על הגת הבאה. So זה בדבר שאין לו גת. So it's like Rabbeinu Chana said, it's like honey, milk, or other oil, excluding the olive oil. That's the Meiri said, because otherwise you have to le'abdam, you have to get rid of them. So the Gemara said, "V'yanichenu lרגל." דבר שלא משתמר לרגל. So this is something that cannot wait until the pilgrim festival, but which was spoiled beforehand. So the dilemma presented in the Rav Sheshet therefore remained unsolved. So if the Amaretz give it to the Kohen not in the time of Gitot V'Badim, not in the time of the press, so the Chafetz Chaim asked, why the Rambam not put this part of the Gemara? He pulled out that part of the Gemara. He's not mentioning that. So the Chafetz Chaim left it in a question. The Meiri said that it's really asur, it's really prohibited. So the Meforshim asked, why is Feika de Rabbanan lekula? It's rabbinic dilemma and we go lenient. So why is prohibited? We left it up unsolved. ואם אמר הפרשתי לתוכה, if אמר said to the חבר, הפרשתי לתוכה, he said, and if the giver said to the Kohen, I separate and place into the barrel of Truma a quarter log of sacrificial wine or oil, so they said, Ne'eman. So he deemed credible. הפרשתי לכל רביעית קודש נאמן. דן אתה מולרם למשנה in אהלות. Chapter 18, מודים בית שמאי לבית הלל שבודקים. בית שמאי agree to בית הלל that you search בית הפרס לעושי פסח. Those pilgrims who go to ירושלים to bring the Paschal lamb, and בודקים אוכלי תרומה. מהי בודקים? How you do this search? אמר רב יהודה אמר שמואל מנפח אדם על בית הפרס והולך. So he said that a person may blow at the ground of the press and walk, and that's the way you can do it. So meaning, since you have an issue of etzem kesora, so maybe by puffing up, he can see it and he be careful not to step on it. Another view of Chia Barabba Mishmei Ulamar Beit HaPras Shenidash. He said that if you have Beit HaPras that was trodden by press-by, who has been beaten a path through walking, Taolis Rosei Pesach. It's considered pious for those who are on the way to perform the Paschal offering. Because the assumption that there is no more bone fragment remain in the surface of the ground. But the sages not uphold the words decreeing the field to be impure in the place where they involved with the karet. So for those who eat truma, they did uphold the words decreeing that in a place that sin involved punishment of mita, which is mita bidei shamayim. So the question is, if one examined the Beit HaPras for the purpose of bringing his Paschal offering, what is the halakha with regard to truma after he travels and the field? It's okay or not? So they said, Ula amar badak lepischo mutar le'echol betrumato. If he searched for the offering of Pesach, he can eat for this truma according to that search. Rabbi Barula amar שבדק לפיסחו אסור לאכול בתרומתו. הנה. אמר לסבה, it was elderly, to say to Rabbi Barula, לא תפלוג על ידי אולה, you should not dispute it to him, לתנן כבתאבים אמר, הפרשתי לתוכה רביעית קודש, נאמן, you see that Amaretz is sometimes is trustworthy when it's come even to the barrel, when it's come to ritual purity of truma in the barrel, alma מדהמן הקודש, נאמן נאמי התרומה, הכנה מדמנה הפסח למעלה מתרומה, so it's also okay to use it for the truma. So then the Mishnah said, next one, we have to rush, we have no time. Kadei ayin v'kadei shemen. We talk in the Mishnah the jug of wine and jug of oil that are mingled. So Amaretz are deemed credible during the period of wine press and the olive press. Tana, ein nemanim lo al kankanim v'lo al tarat hatuma. So kankanim demai, what exactly you speak about flax? Kankanim de kodesh, if you talk about the flax that contain sacrificial food. Migo, the memana kodesh, memana kankanim. You can say that they have the migo. So since they are good, deemed credible concerning to sacrificial items, so it should be also for flax as well. So you have to say, no, ela bekankanim de truma pshita. Hasha kankanim truma lo memana, kankanim meiman. Ela bekankanim de kodesh, ubishar yemot hachama. And I elaborate a lot in my book. Is a Rashi here, Bishat Yomot HaChama, who said, Klomar, I do not have time for that. So they said, בימלה in the תרומה ובשעת הגיטות. תנען כדי יין וכדי שהם למדו מעות, מה ילמדו מעות ותרומה? I'm just reading it, we don't have time. אמר ידבר רב חייא למדו מעות לקודש, ומי יקדימו על הקודש? אמר ידבר רבי אלי במתארת תבלו, ליטול ממנו נסחים. So then it's different, you can do it. So then the Mishnah said, also the Amei Haaretz are trustworthy when it comes to purification of the kelim. So they said, Kodem lagitot 70 yom, 70 days before the period of the wine press. Amar Abaye, Shma mina, you can learn from here that in regards to law of purity, Dinahu, that's the halacha, that's the law, that if you have the ilavei arisa lemitrach agulfei 70 yomin mikamei da'atzarta, that the farmer, you have a tenant farmer in a vineyard must take an effort of acquiring flax for the wine 70 days before the time of the wine press, for the Mishnah considers this amount of time the period of preparation for the pressing of the grapes.
ויחם לשולוים מלאכי השולוים מלאכי